evening and welcome, folks from that corner in the Northeast, the land of reverence and colonialism. This is Dark Hour Paranormal. I am your host, Michael Roser, and it seems we're dealing with a little bit of lag tonight, so just stick in with us. Outside of that, I'll try to cut through into the intro here, but again, we've got a bit of lag. This is really unsettling the way things are turning out. I don't know if you can hear me well, but we're going to continue forward. Folks, I am back from Belize. Jared Murphy and Jim Goodall, myself, and several others embarked out there. I don't know if you have caught some of the adventure as it was unfolding in the one live I was able to do out there. We're back, and we're getting right into the swing of things here, kicking off the summer with a handful of interviews. I was invited to become a speaker over at Paracon in Connecticut. I think it's in Sonia. Coming next couple weeks or so. Unfortunately, I won't be able to attend that one, but I will be at the Paracon in Salem, November 12th and 13th, if I'm not mistaken, that weekend. I'll be up there with Charles Rosenay and his team members. Fantastic dudes. If you haven't seen the interview that we did together, it's a several back there. Please check it out. You'll certainly enjoy it. But tonight, present with us, I know it's been a little bit of time since we've adapted this format. All things considered, I've been very busy, and I promise for those of you who have been patient, you will be very happy with what gets produced and released over the next few months, I think, 2-3 months maybe. So with that in mind, tonight I wanted to talk with Harry Green from the Bridgewater Triangle Investigators. Once again, he's a returning guest. We worked out in the field, produced 2 documentaries simultaneously, sort of parallel to each other. I implore you to go and check out what he's done. Also, take a look at what I've done. But honestly, what he did is a lot more comprehensive. He is a native to this area in Massachusetts, and it's a very curious area because, as the moniker goes, the Bridgewater Triangle that was coined by, I think it was Lauren Cohen, back in 81 with one of his novels. This place is really, really curious, and Harry has been there his whole life, has a lot of experiences. But what we want to cover tonight is this gathering evidence that we have in respect to the paranormal and what that actually means for us as we look towards this field in the future. Again, we can collect so much data, we can collect so many videos, so many EVPs, and at one point, because of the I'm very tired, bear with me. Because of the saturated market, in a respect of these people putting evidence forward, maybe some of it's mediocre, some of it's, somewhat tangible at best in respect to working with something observationally. Maybe somebody's outright throwing something in there that's meant to trick you. Well, it's hard to tell what is real and what isn't when it comes to this evidence, and that is a shame. But with Harry tonight, we're going to go through some of his more recent discoveries in respect to this evidence, whether it be EVP or otherwise. And I think this is significant, again, to keep in mind that the field is still progressive and there are people out there still gathering information and researching. Every day, boots on the ground, Harry Green and his entire outfit, this is what they do. And of course, in respect to this, they garner much respect from all of us in the field for doing that. They are the trendsetters and they are the go-getters. So for those of you who know Harry, welcome him back. And those of you who are being introduced for the first time, this is my good friend Harry Green from the Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Investigators. Harry, thank you so much for being with us tonight. How you doing tonight?
Very good, very good.
Excellent, man. You have a very colorful scheme there. I feel a little dull over here with the purple and blue motif.
My ex-girlfriend hated it, but hey.
Hey, that's all right. The X's are X's for a reason.
Yeah.
Listen, mate, you have been putting in quite some work when it comes to the field of paranormal investigation. And of course, we've, talked about some of the things that you've gotten into on past shows and so forth. Recently, you've been out at least 2 or 3 excursions, I think, if I could name as much. You're still gathering evidence to compile in respect to what you find out there and to prove that this is a phenomenon we should be paying attention to and perhaps even interweaving into our regular consciousness. What's the latest excursion that you went out on, and what did you aim to find and versus what you actually did discover?
We went to the Skim Milk Bridge in Bridgewater. It's a stone structure that crosses over the town river that turns into the Taunton River, the famous Taunton River with all the paranormal sightings over it. And this bridge got its name from the river having a skim milk color at one time, quite some years ago. But what's interesting about the river is it flows from Lake Nippanicket, which is in the heart of the Hockomock Swamp, which Hockomock means place where spirits dwell. It was an ancient burial ground to the natives. It was very sacred. Even the natives actually feared this land. Mm-hmm. And it goes all the way from Lake Nip all the way into the Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. So the story about the Skim Milk Bridge is in 1916, a Brockton girl named Evelyn Packard, I think she was 30 years old, she rented a canoe on South Street in Brockton. Actually, I can show you pictures of the house. It's a historical house now, but back then it was a club. I think it was called the American Legion Club. Don't quote me on that. So she rented her kayak from this place, and she went down the town river in 1916. For some strange reason, they found her kayak, and it was bone dry. There was no evidence of it flipping over, but they didn't find Evelyn for some reason. So they combed the swamps looking for her. A couple of days later, there was a reporter covering the story on, this missing Brockton girl, and he went to sit down to have a smoke break, actually. And when he stood up, he noticed strange carvings in a stone that read something like, "All ye who in future days walk by none contested stream, love not he from the parting beam he wooed in this quiet solitude," something like that. Beautiful poem. No one really knows who, carved it into the stone. Actually, 80 years later, they figured out it was Reverend Timothy Otis Payne, and there's a lot of talk that it's due to the Freemasons. As a past Freemason, we don't carve, write, text, or speak secrets. It's nothing, Freemason related. But as the search continued, they eventually found Evelyn Packard's body by the Skim Milk Bridge. And back then, they didn't really have forensics. They don't know how she passed away. So here it is years later. This was in 2021. Me and another guy that I have, another investigator, Paul, we were investigating the Skim Milk Bridge. We were walking down the trail off of Elm Street in Bridgewater. And we heard what sounded like a woman yelling off in the distance. And we could hear whispers in the swamp. Mm-hmm. And further for our investigation, we caught on camera a white ectomist fly by the camera. And this was quite a ways down. So it wasn't like
I remember you showing me this.
Yeah, mm-hmm. It wasn't our breath that we caught on camera. As a matter of fact, I thought I saw something in the distance. I couldn't really make out what it was. But then when I went back and reviewed the footage, that's when I saw this weird mist. And actually, you can check out that video. It's called the Hockomock Swamp Part 3. It's on our YouTube page. So we
absolutely. Well, before you go on, Harry, I just want to ask you a quick question. I don't know how we might know this, but maybe there's a possibility that we do. Do we know if Evelyn Packard could swim?
We don't know.
We don't know. Okay, sorry. Yep, please proceed.
So we always found that place to be like a place of interest. Another investigator of mine, his name is Seneca, he has a sister named Jody, and she was always quite intrigued with the paranormal. She always liked to sometimes tag along if we're just going out there to investigate. And she wanted to check out the Skim Milk Bridge with us. So we took a trip back down there, and we heard what sounded like a woman saying hello off in the distance. Now, at the time, we didn't really bring any of the equipment. We were just kind of like going on a nature walk down there. A couple days later, we were bored and we were sitting around. We were thinking, let's do something. And she goes, well, let's go ghost hunting back to the Skim Milk Bridge. So we said, okay. I brought some of my equipment. We went back down there, and I have my EMF meter. And I held it out, and I said, if there's anything out here with us or anyone, can you touch this device? And the EMF meter died. It completely shut off. Don't know why. Something drained the energy. I have one of those digital recorders. I was trying to capture some EVPs. I didn't. While we were out there, I felt something right after the meter died. I felt something brush up against my leg. Now, I'm a very skeptic person. Even I jump back. I jump back. Actually, I landed into her son when I jumped back. And at that moment, I realized he wasn't in front of me. So what touched my leg? I didn't know. And all of a sudden, the girl, Jody, got very sick. She leaned over. She said, oh, my God, I don't feel good. I feel like I'm going to puke. And she said she was very hot. And this was probably in early March. It was still winter. She said she felt very hot. She wanted to take off her hat, her jacket. She didn't feel good. Her brother said, let's go back to the truck. As we started walking away, she felt a little bit better. When we got back to the truck, we were debriefing on the situation, and she was kind of staring off into space. And we were like, Jody, and she wouldn't acknowledge us. She kept staring off into space. Finally, she came to, and she goes, what? And like, she didn't hear the conversation that was going on. So we brought her home, and she texted me, and she said, when I got home, Harry, I vomited. I feel a little bit better now. We did some further research. Come to find out, she lives exactly one street over where Evelyn Packard rented her canoe. As a matter of fact, her house is diagonal from that house where Evelyn Packard rented her kayak. The backyard to that club is actually on this girl Jody's street. It's like literally 100 feet. So to me, maybe something ran through me and latched onto her. Maybe it was Evelyn Packard that latched onto her as a free ticket out of the swamp. Because I believe, because it's placed where spirits dwell, the Hockomock, I believe if you pass away in the Hockomock for whatever reason, your spirit is trapped there. So for some reason, maybe she was a thin vessel and they were able to latch on. She was able to latch on to this girl as a ticket out of the swamp. I'm not really sure.
You know, I think it's very interesting to, you know, we talked a little bit about this concept, you know, in our own private conversations, wherein, you know, you're mentioning if somebody dies in the Hockomock Swamp, the spirit gets trapped there. Of course, my question is, what is it exactly that would keep them from moving on? Now, many times we go into certain paranormal situations and we may identify that there are ones who are more benign, let's say, than perhaps a darker overarching energy. And, you know, some mediums have been known to say, well, you know, these other ones that are here are being kind of pushed under the thumb to stay here by this overarching enemy or darkness, I should say, whatever the case may be, whatever the entity actually is. In your opinion, what would keep, you know, we understand what Hockomock Swamp is in that whole area, but what would keep somebody from their free volition in death, wherein the spirit is set free? In your opinion, how would they be trapped in a particular physical location without the physicality enacting on them in order to do so?
I believe I don't believe that the Bridgewater Triangle is a curse. I believe it's a vortex. And I believe that there's a vortex in the Hockomock Swamp itself that maybe it's a portal to the other side, whatever side you believe that is that we pass on to. I believe also because of all the negative activity from King Philip's War, it kind of creates like a sandwich over this vortex that, you know, kind of stops the spirit from passing on. It gets stuck right there.
You know, it's a terrifying thought to go somewhere and, you know, unfortunately somehow have an accident pass on and know that you're now trapped in that area. That's enough to keep most people from stepping foot in a place like the Hockomock Swamp, which maybe is for the better, considering how dense that area is and the fact that there are no orientation points once you get in. Moss doesn't grow on the north side of the tree, so to speak. Everything looks unity. So, you know, you really can't define what we are. And usually, you know, we talk about instruments not so well, and their compasses and other measurements of devices of measurement in that sense often fail or kind of go haywire. So very, very odd place. Now, your friend that had this experience, did she mirror or reflect any of these suppositions or parallels that might be there? I mean, obviously she lived on that street diagonally, the way that you described, but for her personally throughout this experience, did she feel like there was something feminine around her? Perhaps, have any sort of mind's eye vision of what might be happening to her energy at that point to sort of point the way and say, perhaps it might have been Evelyn or it could have been something else?
She didn't get that experience, no. But I know in the past, she told me that she had a very strange dream that really stuck out, of a man in her house that said, "My name is, so and so." I forget the person's name. And this person told her, "Tell my parents in Maine I love them. I'm not around anymore." She said she noticed that the man had like a cut in his neck. And she woke up. She couldn't remember his last name, all the information. So to me, maybe she's that type that, she can communicate with spirits. Maybe she doesn't know it yet.
Mm-hmm. Sensitive of sort without the
Yeah.
knowledge or awareness. Yeah, that definitely can be the case. There are lots of people out there walking about their daily lives that have this particular sensitivity, and it's always misplaced in respect to interpretation. Even going down to empathy, where you're taking on energy of other people, you start getting sick yourself, and you think, man, I just get sick all the time. There are certainly people that, don't have the withal to place what this is in a more comprehensive sense and yet call it what they do. It's a misnomer. And unfortunately, without that accurate understanding of what might be there in totality, you're sort of just throwing a band-aid on a much larger wound that doesn't heal that way, so to speak. It's a little bit more austere, but that's the example anyway. All right, so I mean, we've been to Skim Milk Bridge together before. I mean, it was in the documentaries that we produced. I have to say, it was a very interesting place. The structure there, these stones were quite large. They were obviously glacial stones. Not megalithic in any sense, but they had some weight behind them, to say the least. In fact, again, if you go to Harry's channel, or if you revisit the documentary that I had put together, you'll see this particular place in its full glory. Now, I think when we talked about this during that time, Harry, we were under the impression that Evelyn's body was in one place or another, and I think what did we find, that it actually washed up on the bridge, or was it just close by? Where exactly was her body located?
Under the bridge.
It was underneath the
bridge.
Okay. That's okay. That's what I remember too in Revelation that came afterwards. And of course, it's very easy to see how somebody might get stuck, going underneath here. But again, if she couldn't swim and had accidentally fallen over somehow, that's, very good explanation how she could have passed away. But again, we just don't know if that was the case.
We don't know. That they think that she got out of her kayak, but they don't know why.
Mm-hmm. What makes them think that she got out of the kayak?
Because
other than her body wasn't in it when that was found.
Because it was bone dry, and she was missing. She wasn't anywhere in the water, and unfortunately, 100 things could have happened. There could have been some guys out there. Maybe, unfortunately, she got raped, killed, strangled. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Accosted in some way, shape, or form. Sure, it's all possible out there. I think even at that time, there were still people running around the wilderness to some degree out in the Hockomock Swamp. But again, it's not a very easy place to traverse. So more than likely, they would have had a good idea of where they were entering and exiting to do whatever they were doing. That's just certainly my guess. What else have you been working with in respect to those locations recently? I think there was another thing that you had worked on. Where'd you go? It was a dwelling?
Yeah, we went to the Josiah Keefe house. Now, this is interesting. Reverend Keefe, he was the very first reverend in the town of West Bridgewater. And this was during the 1600s, during King Philip's War. It was actually said that Reverend Keefe spared King Philip's son and wife from being beheaded after the war. His son, Josiah Keefe, he built the Josiah Keefe House in Easton in the year 1717. It's on Bay Road in Easton. Um, his now Josiah Keefe the third, he was actually a lieutenant and then a captain in the town militia. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know this. George Washington led the Continental Army down Bay Road in southeastern all the way up to northeastern to answer the Lexington alarm. There was actually a lot of taverns built on Bay Road where the militia stayed. Wheaton's Farm was actually the training field for the militia. George Washington stayed on Bay Road. So Josiah Keefe, he went, he answered the Lexington alarm. I think he was late. When he came back, he had a lot of debts. He actually freed the last slave in Massachusetts that lived in the Josiah Keefe house. He had freed her. The town wasn't very happy about that. Like I said, he had a lot of debts. He had to sell off a lot of Wheaton's farm, and he ended up committing suicide. He shot himself in the house. The house is very historical. It's the oldest house in Easton. My friend, he goes by Justinian Lee Winter on Facebook, Justin. He moved from New York. He actually bought that house. He said he was the first person to look at it, and he was the last person. He ended up buying it. And since he moved in, he said he's been experiencing all kinds of weird paranormal activities, such as doors closing. He said he witnessed a green kind of like orb type of light in the living room. He heard many disembodied voices. So he had contacted us and said, we were more than welcome to check out the house, investigate.
Did he get a good price on this place? Because it is illegal in Massachusetts to sell someone a home with the knowledge of it being haunted or something along those lines within the folds there.
From what I remember him telling me, it was kind of pricey. There's a lot you can do with historical houses. And there's a lot of things that you can't do, a lot of changes you can't make, even though you own the property. But he thinks it's Josiah Keefe that's haunting this house. And that may be so. We didn't come up with that kind of evidence. We did capture disembodied voices, as a matter of fact. They were very muffled. We couldn't make them out. One of them, it sounded like it was saying, it's party or it's Hardy on an EVP. We couldn't make it out. One EVP we could make out. We left the little digital recorder down on one of the bureaus, and we opened up the drawer, and we actually captured on this recorder somebody saying, "Close the drawer." Now, a lady named Melanie D. Ware, she was the previous homeowner. And unfortunately, she had passed away of cancer. Her husband, a few years later, passed away of cancer, 2 different kinds. And when we were in the house, we put the EMF meter down on this history book of Easton. It's actually an historical book. And the meter kept going off every time when it was on the book. And we couldn't really understand why until Justin told us that Melanie D. Ware was actually a history teacher. And she was a part of the Historical Society. She loved people coming in and out of the house during the holidays. She would always have the fireplaces lit. So it's like she was attached to that book. So that's what we gathered as far as evidence. When we were there, he was telling us about a girl named Abigail Williams. She was 17. I think she died of tuberculosis. And she's known as a prankster. There was a woman in the house, and she kind of got her hair pulled by this girl. When we were upstairs, I did feel the back of my hoodie get tugged on, and the EMF meter did have a spike. And unfortunately, downstairs, we caught it off camera. We were debriefing, but the hat that was on top of the armrest of the couch flew right off.
That's a lot of activity, outward activity for a place like that, or any paranormally afflicted place. I mean, usually that's just a one-off here and there. You hear some bangs on the wall. You capture a disembodied voice. You see one glass shift over to the left about 3 inches. This is the more commonplace type of activity you find in these historic houses or places of certain trauma or events. why do you think that everything was so active in this particular house? The energy's so high, so strong. Do you know if did you had a chance to look at if it was on a ley line or anything along those terms, or could it have been the neighborhood, or was it just the house itself?
It's just outside the Hockomock Swamp, but it is in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Mm-hmm.
It was used as a tavern where the militia did stay back in the day, so
Okay.
maybe some negative energy there. I do know this, that there has been reports of people seeing soldiers dressed in Revolutionary War clothing marching down Bay Road. We actually did an investigation on that. That will be our next video that we're going to upload on YouTube. But there have been quite a few reports of people marching up and down the road. And actually, we kind of came across a solution of two people who it might be actually marching. And like I said, we'll have that video uploaded pretty soon.
Do you feel that the activity on, would you say Bray Road?
Bay Road, yeah.
Bay Road. Thank you. Do you feel the activity there is something more residual, like we might find at Gettysburg or some of these other battlefields where there's no real intellect behind the movements? It's just sort of just playing over and over for all time, so to speak.
I think as far as the soldier goes, it might be something residual. I'd like to note that Bay Road is actually an old Indian road. It was actually the first road actually in Bay Road.
Okay. Speaking of residual hauntings, what are your thoughts? More of an opinion or an educated guess. I'm certain. What are your thoughts on a residual hauntings lifespan? So let's say we've seen the lady in white in the England church for centuries now, right? And then one day she stops appearing, or we go to one of these haunted locations, we see this loop going over and over again, the same action, maybe the same time of day, the same events occur, at least in respect to observation, and then all of a sudden one day it ceases. What do you think that is? That cessation of that activity that, again, I don't know, maybe it wears out, there's not enough energy to go forward, maybe there's a finite bit of that, or maybe it's a projection from an actual consciousness, a part of that person. What are your thoughts on that, Harry?
I think it just has to run its course. I know that we've actually captured residual sounds of gunshots before in the past. They say different phases of the moon, different seasons affect it. Like they say more static electricity in the winter that's in the air affects it, makes it play on a film loop even more.
So you're finding different intensities given seasons or celestial events, or as you mentioned, even the moon where it's waxing or waning. There's certain points we're seeing more of this. I could see how that could be the case, certainly, but again, to see it cease altogether at some point, I wonder where it does run its course, what that process looks like. It's something that is seldom spoken about because you have to really observe this over a period of time, or step to the table with a story that says it began at this point and then ended at this point. We have people witness that. It has never been back. It's a very curious thing to think about.
I know. Now, unfortunately, we don't know because no one's really captured it on camera.
No, at least not in its full spectrum. We can talk about it again anecdotally in a lot of ways, but we don't have anything that's really measured to say, if someone were able to put some sort of equipment out in the kitchen of this one particular house, let's say where a woman passes by at 6 a.m. every morning, and then just measure that, it would be a very tedious affair. And of course, a lot of great evidence would come from that with the consistency. It can be repeated. It's part of the experiment. But at the same time, it would just be such a comprehensive thing because you never know when it's going to actually run out. And you'll still be left with the questions as to why it did. I suspect, and again, it's just, my thought on this, that when you leave an imprint somewhere, whether it becomes a memory of yours or other people that you've interacted with, there's a piece of you, some very small fragment of energy, as we might explain it, that stays put in that same spot. So when people talk about going deep within themselves to find certain parts of their inner child, let's say, fragmented parts in a lot of traumatic senses, just as the movie Of What Dreams May Come somewhat illustrated as Robin Williams' wife went to a purgatory or a hell-like scenario for, offering herself, maybe that isn't what's going to happen. That's a different story altogether in respect to what the person thinks may happen to them and how they hold it against. Anyway, I digress. Very much like that movie where, you have these different layers. I forgot where I was going with this. I was going somewhere with this. It was probably profound too, but regardless, it'll come back to me. But the fragments, right? So again, when people undergo these pieces of soul retrieval, I think is the correct way of defining that. They go and they find themselves sort of cowering in different places in time, space, if you will. It seems to be within themselves is how it's accessed through meditation or even hypnosis, but they can go and retrieve that part of themselves. So for example, you come across, at the age I'm 41. Okay. So I go into this and I come across a very small part of myself that's in my room at home, the place I grew up in. And it was after, something traumatic happened to me. And you physically in your mind go up to this child and you say, hey, it's going to be okay, and you give them the love and so forth. Next thing you know, they might walk out of the room with you. And it's a metaphor for them rejoining that energy, and you don't have that lost part of yourself. So we get into, when we talk about this, a bit of shamanism is involved in this sort of interpretation. But again, soul retrieval and the soul fragmentation. I mean, the Black Projects did it too. They did it too. And they actually gave some people the tools through that discovery to go back and retrieve them. Andrew Basiago is one of those people that purportedly can go within themselves and find these pieces or heal certain aspects about themselves. So anyway, I don't mean to get so off topic in respect to that analysis or thought, but back to the Bridgewater Triangle, there was a point I think you had mentioned that, and this was recently, that, you've noticed that over some time here, the activity itself overall has sort of come to a lull. Now,
Yes.
for an area that's that big and you have the Freetown State Forest and all this, where did you come to that conclusion within your observation? And why do you think that might be after all these years of such turmoil?
Because I've noticed a lot of the things that people used to talk about in the Triangle, these reports, you don't really hear of them anymore. Like, I know the black choppers, that was a big famous thing in the Bridgewater Triangle. These black choppers, people would see over the Hockomock. People would wonder, why are they out there? What are they looking for? But there is actually an army base on West Chestnut in Brockton. So it's possible that these black choppers, they're just test flying these. But as far as these other reports like Bigfoot sightings, you don't really hear of anyone saying that they've seen them as of lately. I know when we started investigating since 2020, we've been out there constantly, and I think it took us 2 years until we actually really came up with some solid kind of evidence and proof of actually something. Because I know I'm a skeptical person. We caught that face in the Hockomock Swamp hovering over the trees, that blue face that evaporated.
Which is very interesting. Very interesting, by the way.
Yeah, it took us 2 years before we even captured something like that. It seems that like a lot of these reports are just kind of fading out.
And again, why do you think that might be? Why this period of time? Has it reached some sort of end of its cycle?
I think because, and I've said this before, I think because more and more people are building in the Hockomock Swamp. So you have these families now that are coming onto the land. There's all this happiness that's sandwiching over the negative imprint that was left in the Bridgewater Triangle.
With that model that you described, do you think there will come a time where some of that negative energy needs to rise to the top once again and perhaps isn't going to be blanketed by, this other type of more elite frequency?
I don't think it will, no. Because if it, let's say for a minute, it is a curse. Curses have to eventually fade out. Or if it is a vortex, if you're stuck on that theory, these vortexes eventually will get smaller.
Much like the Great Unconformity, which is, for those of you who are not familiar, a geological anomaly where, we look between different strata within, the Earth here as we dig down, and we can measure, certain years and, where different eras were, so to speak. the Great Unconformity is a chunk of about 1 million to 2 million years that, wherever you're looking is missing from this strata. And nobody really knows where it went. Now, I thought about this for some time, and I mentioned this theory very recently on another show, wherein, you have tectonic plate movement, wherein, things kind of come together, and next thing you know, one pushes down on the other, and this goes back into the magma to be, boiled back out into, this matter once again sometime later. But all of that information turns to dust or gets reabsorbed into the earth, only to be repurposed in a completely different form as it, gets extruded out through time. Perhaps the energy that we see when it comes to these residual hauntings or places like the Hockomock Swamp or Bridgewater Triangle in general, perhaps areas like this, the energy mirrors what happens here physically, wherein eventually, using the adjective reabsorbed, or verb actually, right, is, I think, the appropriate language, talking about what this is. Because eventually, I mean, if you don't have certain hauntings living its course or going, to a certain point, and then, that's it, no more energy left, they just dissipate. The time was there, the imprint's still there, but it's more finite than what we were aware of. If that's the case, it makes sense that we can have these things blip into our reality. They're there for a period of time and they're off. If not, this entire planet, it would be rife with, wandering souls and all sorts of trauma happening in the ethers, that you could step in any space, in any place, at any time and feel it, relive it even, depending on who you are. I talk about sensitivities. So it's very curious, at a place like the Bridgewater Triangle, and to see some of this activity waning. Now, I would only argue that there's a possibility, that's not really an argument, it's more of a statement, that because things generally come in waves, and we live in a world where the sine wave is the root of our reality, it is possible at some point that some other event occurs and draws some of this up again to the surface. It may not look exactly the way it does now, but areas like the Hockomock Swamp, for example, are very charged areas. And when you walk into this place, you can feel it. You can certainly feel it around you. You can feel the pressure change within the air. And it's not just the close-knit trees. I just came back from the jungle. We were hacking our way through jungle walls, okay? 10-foot razor grass, as thick as you could see, maybe a foot in. That's about as far as you got. So it didn't even feel, I mean, it's not the oppressiveness of the environment. It's just that place itself. And of course, the environment tends to be an ominous factor, playing on your senses at the very least, but there's something else there. And that is for sure. Again, it's very tangible when you walk through. It's like a web. You can feel it. What else have you been looking towards working with Harry in the future here? I mean, are you going to continue with these investigations as you've been doing, or are you going to focus on another fantastic documentary like the last one that you just released? What are your plans for the future in regards to you and your outfit?
I don't plan on doing another documentary. It consumed my life. So it's definitely a no-go. But we do want to continue investigating the Bridgewater Triangle and actually expanding out. The triangle is always our home base. But actually, I do have a theory about all these anomalies inside the Hockomock, or just in the triangle in general. If you look at it like this, in the late 1970s, that's when people started seeing Bigfoot sightings, Thunderbirds, even the big giant cryptid dog in Edmonton. This was all in the late 70s. There was also UFO sightings in the late 70s. And I had a theory that, and actually a lot of people agree with this theory, that these UFOs, they may not be aliens or these beings from another planet. It might actually be us from the future. And that these spacecrafts might be time machines, time vessels, either producing a wormhole pocket for time travel or finding these wormhole pockets. So maybe these vessels are opening these vortexes, releasing the Thunderbirds, the Bigfoots, and that's why these sightings were more common back in the late 70s, early 80s than now, because now there really isn't any UFO sightings anymore.
When was the last documented Thunderbird sighting in the Bridgewater Triangle?
Late 90s.
Late 90s. And you had your experience around the same time?
1996, yes. And another female
96.
witnessed it in 99, I think she said.
What was her experience like, very quickly? And then I'll ask you to jump very briefly into your experience for those of our audience who are not familiar with that fantastic sighting that you had.
She said she was driving down Edmonton in a street late one night, and a egg fell on her car, and it was a thick eggshell. And there was yolk all over her windshield. And when she got home, her mother said there was this big, huge, humongous bird crashing through the trees.
Crashing through the trees?
Yes.
So, I mean, was it in her mind flying through the branches, or was it down on the ground, just to get the visual here?
Up ahead, like crashing through like the tops of the branches.
Unbelievable. And this isn't the first time somebody's seen something like this, but this is the first time I've ever heard of an egg dropping on someone's car, where, I mean, when you first described this to me, it took up the whole windshield at the very least, right?
Yeah.
Something along those lines?
Yes.
So that's curious, and seems very much out of place. The bird would just drop the egg out of nowhere, but clearly the egg came from somewhere. If it wasn't some pranksters in the bushes, then maybe we do need to look to the skies.
Yeah.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about your sighting when it came to the Thunderbird? Because a lot of us will sit back and say, yes, we have paranormal experiences. Oh, we see UFOs. Maybe some of us have been abducted. These are all very formidable experiences that certainly need to be recounted with the utmost clarity for just the composition and composure of the person, much less what they're going to exchange with another. But Thunderbirds, or cryptids in general, seem to be very seldomly seen and experienced by most people. And you're one of the fortunate ones to have seen a Thunderbird. And again, for the sake of repetition, because I know there are people who haven't heard this story, do you mind telling us about your sighting, Harry?
It was 1996. It was in the summer. Me and a friend of mine, Troy, he lived actually down the street from me. We used to ride our bikes, and behind Brockton High on Forest Ave, there's old quad trails. They're not there anymore. It's filled in, but we used to ride our bikes down there. And one day we got off our bikes for some reason, and he looks up in the sky and he runs into the bushes. And I'm thinking, what is he running from? And the bushes, they're blowing like crazy. The trees, the branches, they're swinging back and forth. And I look up in the sky, and heading towards me was a bird that looked like the bird from King Kong. Actually, it was huge. It had the wingspan of a 1978 Lincoln Town Car, probably each wing, and it was flying towards me, and it was probably 3 stories up, and the material, like the texture of the bird, it kind of looked like old worn out suede, like brown suede. It actually had some debris caught in its, like, under its torsos. Under its torso, it had like cobwebs and some twigs stuck in some patches of fur, and it flew by me going south towards the Hockomock Swamp. And this was before I heard of the Bridgewater Triangle or even knew what the Hockomock Swamp was. And my friend, he came out of hiding, and he's like, "Harry, do you see the size of that bird?" And I'm like, I'm trying to be the brave one. I'm like, yeah, I knew it wouldn't hurt us. Even though the thought that was going through my head at the time, I was thinking, oh God, I hope he doesn't think I'm a worm and scoop me up on his way. Because like I said, it was 3 stories up. It was pretty close. But here's what's interesting about Brockton High. Brockton High is actually fairly new. It was built in the late 70s, maybe early 70s. My father actually has pictures of him skating on the pond that was originally Brockton High. It was actually a swamp. There was a lot of farmland in that area. There was the swamp. Brockton High was built on top of it. They say Brockton High sinks 1/8 of an inch every 10 years or something. But the swamp is right outside of West Bridgewater State Forest, which is part of the Hockomock. So it's pretty safe to say that area was part of the Hockomock at one time.
How expansive is the Hockomock Swamp today?
It goes from Bridgewater, West Bridgewater, parts of Taunton, parts of Norton, Easton, Raynham, and that's it. I think it's 16,000 acres.
That's quite expansive. There's just a lot there, and God knows if we were able to map it all, much less do some research over 16,000 acres. But damn it, we try. We certainly try, and it's the same thing with archaeology.
That's just what's mapped out. Like I said, I think it actually shows on a map that it stops right at West Chestnut Street, but obviously I think it actually extended further than what we know, because you got to think after Brockton High is Stonehill College. Out in the back is the old Indian caves. And we know that Frederick Ames Sr. built on top of the unceded wampum lands. He built the Stonehill house, which is now part of Stonehill College. So it's pretty safe to say that was part of the Hockomock, that whole area where this Thunderbird came from.
Well, speaking of expansion, I think we'd have talked about this at some point, that the way that Lauren had defined the triangle was actually maybe more or less a very limiting model of the activity that's there. You said to me that you believed that the borders of this triangle were had much longer arms. How far is this triangle actually reaching? And to a degree, does it still look like a triangle?
It goes, yeah, it's a triangle. It goes, to me, I've realized it goes all the way to Salem, Massachusetts, all the way down to place in Rhode Island, Colt State Park in Rhode Island, all the way to Cape Cod. And Lauren Coleman in 1983, he actually drew out a triangle on a road map, he said, real quickly in his car. But he was already under the impression it was a triangle because of the free Bridgewaters, but he quickly marked it out. But I've noticed, though, yeah, the triangle is a lot bigger than what it was mapped out to be.
Still very curious. I mean, he might have been very preemptive in that strike, but at least he was able to define something for us moving forward, just kind of create this locale within his book that says, hey, this we've noticed through these experiences, this is where it is. And again, we have a place to start. I have to agree with you. In many cases, it seems that these triangle borders extend far beyond what we've already observed and what we define. We have the Bennington Triangle. You have another triangle in, I think it's Vermont, right? The Bennington, I think, goes over New Hampshire. It could be the other way around. I have to look back at it. It's been a while. Devil's Triangle, Alaska. You have the Bermuda Triangle. All these triangles everywhere. And yet, even on the peripheral borders, people still talk about certain activity. If these are indeed vortexes or places of extreme energy, in your opinion, what does this purpose serve humanity outside of having the deepest understanding as an indigenous culture, let's say, passed down through generations, what to do with this type of power spot?
Like, what do you mean, like, what to do with it?
So let's say indigenous people knew that they could use these power spots, that they could contact their ancestors because the veil was thinner, or some sort of utilization that they garnered information, from their elders, said this is what this kind of spot is. Today, it just seems that we get in the way and, meet our own tragic ends, walking or flying into some of these spaces that are full of trauma and deterioration. Anyway, you get where I'm going with this. So what do we do with the Bermuda Triangle today? What do we do with the, power of the Bridgewater and some of these others that we've talked about? Are they something that we can still utilize as the human beings that we are today in the culture that we are today? Or is it just going to be something anomalous that we sort of stay away from, but, look out from afar?
I think we'll look at it out from afar, but I know at one time people were trying to use it to their advantage with all the cult activity in Freetown State Forest.
That's true. There was a lot that happened in the Freetown State Forest, and people were trying to manipulate and exercise certain
Demons.
intentions within
Yep.
their acts. Yeah, yeah, like dark stuff. I mean, and there's history within the crimes that have been committed, and some of the most atrocious things you can think of. I will not mention here, but you can do the research and find that Freetown State Forest. Just look at the history, even till today. We've had issues, in finding different things out there, and there were ritualistic sites. I mean, this is all documented stuff. So,
Well,
dark
yeah,
woods, very odd place.
because that's because of the Puckwudgies, that, and it was, New England is famous itself just for the devil being here at one time. He left his
Mm-hmm.
hoof and a lot of stones scattered throughout New England. So people look at it as a hotspot to like try to contact the dead, or try to have communication with the devil and raise demons and evil spirits.
That's exactly how the legend goes. And there's a lot of that energy that goes into it. And I do think that when people become aware of a certain place like this and they have their own awareness, it may be imposed to actually strengthen or heighten some of this activity, this energy that's already present. In other words, it might be a little bit more dormant for just your average person to walk through. But as soon as multiple people know about this place as the description we give it, well, it again might just lend to some of that energy and some of the activity that we do experience. Listen, Harry, we're getting to the close of the show, but I do want to thank you very much for coming on tonight. Always a blast having you come through. I mean, you're one of the last great ones out there. There are a few of them. But Harry sits right in that category of the critical thinker, and has the practicality behind him, but
The
still has
skeptic.
that open mind.
Yeah,
Very
skeptic.
skeptical.
Yeah.
You gotta keep that at the forefront.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'll never know what you're looking at. Really.
Right. Would you rather have somebody that's going to tell you, yes, it's haunted, or yes, this is what's going on, to someone that's skeptic that might try to like role play or reenact what could it possibly be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't say it better right there. I mean, the obvious choice is right in front of us. We want the truth. We want the person that's going to give it to us straight and
Yeah.
say, we don't really know, but here's what we have. And sometimes you can be more conclusory about it. Sometimes you can say, this is so anomalous, we're going to lean in this direction. And that's okay too. That's important to be able to have that leniency within what you do, to come to those certain results and say, well, maybe we've actually got the bona fide thing that we think is a paranormal experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
It's not that
where can
we
people
don't
find you?
want.
Sorry, go ahead.
When we go into like houses, or when someone tells us about a certain area, it's not that we don't want to believe you. Believe me, we want that paranormal experience that you had. It's just, it's not that we don't want to believe you. We just want to look at what it might possibly be other than paranormal. And we always try to rule out the paranormal last. We try to rule out what it could be. If it's like maybe an older house, maybe there's, steam pipes through the floor that's manipulating walking sounds, versus something paranormal. We always try to rule out paranormal last.
I couldn't think of doing it any other way. And anyone who does, well, you ought to be very skeptical of those groups. Tell you X, Y, and Z, this is what it is, without going through the logical end of things first. That's so important to do. And again, one of the reasons that I respect your outfit so much and the work that you've done over so many years now, Harry, and it looks like there's no end in sight. Where can people find you?
The Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Investigators, right here on YouTube, and we just started a Facebook group page that you can check out. I always do my little like mini podcasts in there every now and then. I also share posts and pictures. I don't know if you've seen the picture of the Stanley Ironworks actually in Bridgewater. Did you see that post?
I don't recall.
There is a place in Bridgewater. It's the Stanley Ironworks. It's very historical. Actually, part of the building is knocked down. But the locals have seen some weird. They've been experiencing some weird activity over there. They said that they've seen a man in a blue, like, work uniform walking his dog, and he disappears. And for some reason, they nicknamed him Ralph. I don't know where they came up with that name, but we were out there just, checking out the area. And one of my investigators, Paul, took a picture, and it's on the Facebook page. It looks like the shape of an apparition. It actually looks like some kind of ectomist either evaporating from an apparition or getting ready to form into one. But he caught it right there on camera. It's pretty interesting.
You know, there ought to be a comprehensive compilation of these bits of evidence, and maybe it's something we can talk about moving forward, because again, it's good to have them in one place or another because you get the whole story behind that. But for, you know, I think a crash course, people sometimes need, not even thinking about a beginner sense or anything elementary, I think people need to see it all in one place and, you know, kind of go through it in this respect, knowing that, you know, back to back to back to back, all right, this is all piling on top of itself. And yeah, you can't turn away and ignore things at a certain point. You know, going through all that evidence that, you know, you've captured and perhaps others have as well. You know, maybe again, we'll talk about that moving forward. But once again, here, yep, go ahead.
What was interesting about it is it's the same shape as the anomaly that I seen in 2007 at the Hanson Tuberculosis Hospital that was abandoned and haunted. That was actually the very first time I actually seen something paranormal. I was 25 years old. But it was, like I said, the picture that Paul caught, it was in the same shape, the same height as that.
So strange. There must be some connection there, even if it's just in form. You know, perhaps this is something that, you know, spirit just kind of selects in its own,
yes,
with whatever ramifications it has, you know, to look forward to, this shape or that shape, depending on the frequency. I mean, God, this could be a whole other conversation, just talking about form versus, you know, the environment that, you know, they appear in. Because sometimes you see little cubes, and this is indicative of UFOs as well, oddly enough, or you see black circles or bubbles, you know, floating about. You know, you see these different shapes that have different geometry, and you have to wonder what the reason behind those certain geometries would be for them to manifest this way. So it's very curious, and again, something we'll explore in the future here. But yeah, once again, Harry, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I had a fantastic time as always, so informational, and I love again your locking in of the historic culture and local history that you bring to, you know, not only your towns and the surrounding towns, but, you know, the whole state, because people have been looking at this phenomenon for so long, and you're one of those people out there to sort of set the path correctly. There's a lot of misconstruence when it comes to the Bridgewater Triangle and the folklore surrounding it. A lot of muddled stories and anecdotal stuff that's been thrown into piles and then kicked around and sifted through, and something stuck to something else. You're actually that voice of reason when it comes to disseminating what was there, you know, based on the history and the events that purportedly occurred. So thank you so much for your work, my friend.
We actually have a theory on the red-headed hitchhiker, but that might be for another time. But we actually think of what it might have been.
Okay, that's interesting. I would like to get back into that. We can do another show soon, but you and I can talk about that off the air. And I mean, hell, we can do it as soon as you like, because that's one of those stories that, you know, Jeff Belanger had outlined a little bit more thoroughly in some of his research. And of course, we've been hearing about this red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44 for a very long time. I mean, I remember seeing something like this on Unsolved Mysteries, you know, many years ago, you know, going through the dramatic reenactment and so forth. I thought, man, this is terrifying. But come to find out, a lot of what was being purported was the accurate portrayal of, that legend. So, yes, let's definitely get back into that. Wow, my goodness, get the hiccups here. Hang out in the back. I'll say my proper goodbyes off camera. Once again, Harry Green from the Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Investigators. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate. The paranormal is just one of those nebulous fields, perhaps even more nebulous than some of the other fields that should be sitting in the realm of some sort of fog. Paranormal kind of takes the cake every single time. And yet we live our daily lives having certain experiences, some of us aware of them, some of us not. Premonitions can even go under that umbrella. And I've had a few of those recently. And unfortunately, they came to fruition. It wasn't something that I had necessarily preferred, but I was shown the certain steps of what would come and what would happen to a certain degree, flashing in my mind. And sure enough, the reality soon unfolded. But, you know, these are exercises from the universe to sort of make sure that you're still on par with what you plan to do here, the perceptions that you wanted to take, and the growth that you want to make within yourself and perhaps those around you as you travel throughout this entire life. Not really on your own, but it seems like that sometimes, doesn't it? Folks, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. Once again, we are back and we will continue putting out these interviews, doing the live shows. I have a lot on the pegboard to pull down, put together within these interviews and the documentaries. I'm working on perhaps 3 right now, and 2 of them major productions, but it's good. We're going to get there. And I, again, thank you all for your support and, of course, your diligence and dedication, sticking it in here with Dark Hour Paranormal. They're going on 3 years. Going on 3 years. I think in the 21st of this month will be 3 years for this channel. So thank you all for your support once again. I appreciate your presence. And until next time, well, you know what to do. Keep your head up. And as Blake and Brent Cousins would say, keep your eyes to the skies. We'll see you next time. Ciao.